Sound can be the most enjoyable of the senses. We all love music, and we all have our favourite songs, but sound can also cause significant harm, both physical and psychological. A sudden high pitched sound may perforate an eardrum, a prolonged droning noise may drive a person insane over time. Sound baths have become a popular form of relaxation of late. Our favourite horror films often treat us, or punish us, depending upon how you look at it, to a sound bloodbath. Hello, everybody, and welcome back for episode 5 of Graham's Haunted Life. Last week I spoke about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I spoke about the fact that that film punishes the watcher with sound, with audio. So I want to expand upon that this week, and I want to talk about the scores and soundtracks that go along with our favourite horror films. Any good horror film will have a really good soundtrack that enhances everything that you're seeing. I've got a couple of examples to speak about. Going way back to my childhood, does anybody remember the TV show Are You Afraid of the Dark? And do you remember the opening titles? That, for a kid's show, was so unnerving, and still to this day, to watch it back, it's surprising that that was the intro to a kid's show. It's actually really, really atmospheric, and it's really well done. And the same goes for the intro music to The X-Files. Now, in the 90s, when I was a kid, I used to watch The X-Files. My mum would let me watch it, and I would pretend I wasn't too scared. But I'm telling you, that intro music, it got me every time. And I still, to this day, have a copy of the cassette single of the theme music. It was obviously released as a single that did really well in the 90s, and I've still got a cassette copy of it. I absolutely love that music, but as a young kid in the 90s, it terrified me. It really did its job, and it may be the root of my love for a good film score, especially if it's a horror film. So you've got like the sillier end of the spectrum, like a film like Killer Clowns from Outer Space, which I only mention now because the DVD is directly opposite me on the shelf. It's a kind of more silly soundtrack, very synth driven, and it also has a main theme song written by the punk band The Dickies, which is really fun. But then you kind of go on to more sort of serious soundtracks from more serious horror films that really set a tone, like Lucio Fulci's The House by the Cemetery. The score that's going on with that is quite subtle, and you actually get a lot of silence with little hints of disturbing noises happening on the periphery of your hearing. And then all of a sudden, when something scary happens, there's a big sort of stab of sound that accompanies the visual you're getting. That may be a scream, or it may be some kind of instrumentation, but it's absolutely genius. Another stroke of absolute genius in the world of horror films and their soundtracks is the use of Tubular Bells by Mike Oldfield throughout the film The Exorcist. Now, The Exorcist is a film that had this massive reputation when I was growing up in the 90s. People spoke about it as this film that made people faint in the theatres and stuff, and all of that really was just promotional sort of guff. But that soundtrack, those guys using Tubular Bells by Mike Oldfield, was so effective. That piece of music, that album, is so creepy to listen to. It's absolutely genius. And the guy plays every sound of that by himself on the album. And I saw something recently where he spoke about the lengthy process of playing each instrument and layering it up, and the time it takes to to play all of these parts, because there was a lot of different instruments on that album. And I'm sure in the second half of the album, he does a lot of weird vocalizations that were almost like death metal vocals, but not quite. Such a cool album, such a cool soundtrack. And another soundtrack from a film that really, really had an effect on me when I first saw it was John Carpenter's Halloween, the 1978 Halloween. And obviously the theme tune was composed and performed by John Carpenter himself. Absolutely beautiful. Really, really sets the tone throughout that film. You get those moments where something will suddenly come into shot and there's that little twinkle of keys that accompanies it, and it's just so atmospheric for such a very simple film. I absolutely love Halloween. It's one of my favourite films of all time. As soon as the autumn comes, I'll be watching that film. I'm ashamed to say I don't own a copy of the soundtrack. I'm going to get a copy of it, and I'm going to start looking around for the albums that John Carpenter did, the like lost themes and stuff like that, because he composed music for pretty much all of his films. I don't think I'm wrong in saying that. Certainly for a lot of them he did. I've got a few albums that are film scores from sort of the horror world that I'll occasionally put on in the background while I'm doing jobs around the house, or I'll put on in my ears while I go walking to work or something. Like, I've got a copy of the Dawn of the Dead soundtrack, which is another one that's sort of on the silly end of the spectrum, but it does have some really cool atmospheric sort of synthy stuff in there as well. You've got like silly tracks like the Gonk. Yeah, a great film score. I've got a copy of the soundtrack to The House of the Devil, the Ty West film, and that one's a really nice atmospheric soundtrack. It's a nice old atmospheric film, very sort of like a nostalgic vibe you get from Ty West films. He was definitely sort of looking back to the 70s and 80s when he was making films. The House of the Devil is brilliant. The opening sort of shots of that, with the main character sort of going about her business, and occasionally the screen would freeze and some name would come up on the screen in this bold yellow writing. Beautiful, very 1970s. But the soundtrack is great. It's a lovely like piece of music to listen to, even though it's quite oppressive and dark. But it's so relaxing to me. I also have on vinyl, I've got a big double vinyl copy of the score from the first Resident Evil game, which is another absolutely beautiful piece of music. It's another one where you can just sort of put that on, sit back, and let it take you away a little bit for a nice rest. And obviously, if you've played the game as you're listening to that score, you can relive in your head where you would be at in playing that game. That was a game that me and my friends loved back in the day on the first PlayStation. Good old times. I've got a couple of soundtracks on cassette from way back in the day, and one of them is one of the Freddy Krueger film soundtracks. I can't remember which number it is. One of the Nightmare on Elm Street soundtracks on cassette, and I can't place the box full of cassettes. I don't know where they are, so I couldn't get it to my hand for this video, well, for this podcast. I would have liked to have dug it out and sort of spoken about that a bit more, but I used to play that a lot when I was young. I used to think it was really cool that I had this tape that was music, but it wasn't like songs, it was a score, and as an older guy now, I really enjoy that more than I do listening to a traditional song. I enjoy listening to music that can be in the background. And Brian Eno once said he liked to make music that was equally as ignorable as it is interesting. And I find that with a lot of horror film scores, I find them very interesting, and they can pull me in and have my full attention. And at other times, they can just be in the background and they help me get on with what I need to get on with. There's a thing in the world of death metal music and heavy music in general where bands will use samples from horror films, especially in the world of death metal, just because it fits in so well. There's a band that I absolutely love called Mortician, and they weave little snippets from horror films into a lot of their stuff. I mean, their album Chainsaw Dismemberment, which for me may be one of the most perfect death metal albums of all time. Perfect artwork, perfect dirty sound, woven with loads of samples from horror films. And they have another album called The House by the Cemetery, which obviously is named after the film by Lucio Fulci and has a lot of samples from that film. Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. It really sets the tone for death metal, to hear lines from a familiar, really gory film that you enjoy before you get absolutely destroyed by, some massive crushing death metal riffage. There's a band from my local area. They're called Uncoffined, and they're like a death doom band. And they put in a lot of like Hammer horror samples from sort of Plague of the Zombies and stuff, and The Devil Rides Out in their first album. The album is called Ritual Death and Funeral Rites, and I'll put a link in the description because it's a really good album, and if you're into heavy music and you're into sort of death and doom, you'll really enjoy it. There's a kind of music scene that I'm really into. It's like harsh noise stuff, and a lot of that music is very much inspired by horror film scores. I myself make some music that is inspired by horror film scores and very much exists within that world of noise and field recordings and effects pedals being daisy chained and abused. And there are a lot of releases. I've got an entire box full of massively obscure harsh noise releases, a lot on cassette, some on CD, a little bit on vinyl. I mean, prominent sort of bands from that world would be like Wolf Eyes from the United States. I bought a DVD in a local record shop of Wolf Eyes performing live, and I absolutely love it. It's chaos and it's really noisy and it's really abrasive. But this record shop that I bought it from, they always put a little sort of note on the sleeve with their thoughts, on the price tag with their thoughts about it and who might enjoy it. And it had something like, when I bought it, it said, perfect for fans of such and such, but unlistenable in my humble opinion. So the guy who ran the record shop clearly didn't like it at all. But it's really good that he checks out the stuff that he's going to sell and writes on who it may interest. That's really cool. But yeah, Wolf Eyes are a big name in that sort of world of noise. There's another act called Megaterror, and I believe it's a one-man band from Sweden, but I could be very wrong there. He's got this album called The Curse of the Scarecrow, and it's so atmospheric. Like, when you listen to that, you can't believe that it wasn't the score from a horror film. It's amazing. And there's another local sort of guy who I sort of know, and in the past I've bought books from the guy, and I've bought bits of music from the guy, and I've bought some of his music. I'm not going to use his name, but I will tell you his band name. So he was, he may well still do it, but he was in a band called the Dead End Street Band, and I've got a couple of releases by them. And he packages them really nice. Rather than in a CD case, he puts them in a DVD case with really nice big artwork that looks like the cover of a vintage horror film. Uh, some really good stuff there. And he had this other project for a while. I'm not quite sure if this was just him on his own, but he had this project called Church Burner, and I'll link I'll link one of the albums by Church Burner in the description of this, because it's so brutal, just made up of layer after layer after layer of absolute murky noise and obscure vocals, really nasty vocals, really brutal sounding song names. The title of the album is really brutal. I won't say that here, but there will be a link in the description. All of this stuff very much sounds like it should be in the background of a horror film. Now, I suppose this whole episode has been about sound and music in a way, but I'm still going to do my album of the week. It just so happens that my album of the week is a film score for a film that I've enjoyed for years and years. The film is 30 Days of Night, and in front of me on my little desk here, I've got a copy of the DVD. It's a special edition copy, and it comes with a small booklet that contains part of the graphic novel that the film was based on. And I also have a really lovely CD version of the film score. It's really nicely packaged in a cardboard sleeve, and it all folds out, reveals some absolutely lovely photos from from the production of the film, I suppose, and maybe a couple of these photos are purpose taken just for this CD. Now the sleeve itself is a beautiful still shot of one of the vampires from the film, and it's been heavily edited, so the vampire itself is very much sort of there's a negative effect, but rather than black and white, it's black and red, spattered with black splashes of ink, and it's just beautiful. And on the back cover, we've got a black background with spatters of red and really bold, lovely red writing for the song titles, or rather track titles. But it's a beautiful score. It's this week's album of the week. It is the score for 30 Days of Night by Brian Reitel, and it's just made up with all sorts of synth tones and synth drones and loops and bits of keys. And what I've always loved about this score is it has its peaks and troughs. It goes really calm at times, and you don't really think there's much going on, and then there'll be a stab of sound. There'll be parts of the score where the keys and the synths are sort of going at a gallop, denoting a sort of action sequence within the film, and other points where there's just really nice, calm electronic sounds going on, luring you into a false sense of security. It's a really good film, and it's a really lovely film score, and I've been playing it a lot this week. I walked to work this morning, played as much of it as I could in the time it takes me to walk to work. It's a really, really beautiful score, and I say beautiful about music that really shouldn't be described as beautiful, because it's dark and it's sickly and it's oppressive, but that to me is beautiful. So if you haven't ever seen the film 30 Days of Night, give it a watch. It's a very enjoyable film about a clan of vampires that descend upon the northernmost town in Alaska, which is obviously plunged into darkness for a good chunk of time during the winter. Perfect feeding ground for a clan of ancient vampires. Now, if you're not that interested in the film, the score is still something you could find really, really nice and really enjoyable. Again, I've said it before, I've said it earlier in this in this particular episode. I like something that I can put on in the background and ignore, but that I can also really, really give my full attention to. And this score is definitely one of those. It's absolutely brilliant. So, having said all that, I'm gonna talk a bit about the music I'm making at the moment. So, I've made a lot of sort of synth-driven music that could very well be part of a horror film score. In fact, were inspired by horror film scores. And I'm gonna play a piece at the end of this. Just like I did the other week, I played a piece of my music at the end. I'm going to play something that's a little bit different to what I played the other week. Something that's made up of field recordings and synths and little bits of vocalizations here and there. Now, the other day, I began writing some more music. I've got this sort of concept album that's building and building that I'm putting together. But it's kind of over on the sideline because it's quite complex and I'm really taking my time with it, and I'm going to get that put together. And that may well be next year by the time that sees the light of day. Now, as a break the other day, I began to write some really gory lyrics that could be, death metal lyrics. And I'm going to record 3 tracks pretty soon of like a blend of harsh synthesizer noise with a little bit of like guitar riffage. Really make it sound dirty and nasty, and do some death metal vocals over the top of all of that. And I'm going to release that as quick as I possibly can. I'm going to get it recorded over the next couple of weeks. But yeah, I'm going to wrap this up. And before I play the piece of music I've got prepared, I'll say thank you for listening, and I'll see you back here next Monday. But without further ado, let's play Dragged to the Water's Edge by my musical project Dark Life.